Alafia, I'm Dr. Gloria Latimoe-Peace, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. And this show is entitled History According to Black. And we have as our guest in the studio Timuel D. Black. And he's been around, and not just been around, but he's been busy being around for a long enough time to know a whole lot of history. So we want to talk to him about a book that he's working on. In fact, the first volume is due to come out this year in the fall. It's called Bridges of Memory, an oral history of 3 generations of African Americans in Chicago. And it says 3 generations of African Americans have lived in the city of Chicago and have to a large degree made the city what it is today. Timuel Black came with his parents early in the first wave of migration from 1919 to 1945. Another migration wave came in the years after World War II, and a 3rd generation, born and bred in Chicago, faces a difficult and challenging future here. Tim Black, former professor of social sciences at the City Colleges of Chicago, and former acting president of Olive Harvey College. I know that for a fact because I was part of your administration. A proud social activist and civil rights activist in the city for the last 40+ years, has conducted over the past decade an oral history project of extraordinary significance and importance. He has interviewed hundreds of representatives from each of the 3 generations and is putting together a book based on these interviews as the first book in a new series of books on African American history in Chicago, to be published jointly by Northwestern University Press and DuSable Museum of African American History. Bridges of Memory is scheduled for publication during 2003.
October, really.
And it's October 2003.
Yeah.
Oh, goody. Now, first I want to ask you, you came in the first migration. You came from where?
I was born in Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay.
December the 7th,
All
1918.
Right. Oh, my goodness.
And legend has it that when I was about 8 months old, I looked around in Birmingham and I said to my mother and daddy, I'm leaving here. And so Mama said, Dixon, this boy doesn't know how to even change his diapers. I'm going with him. And Daddy said, Maddie, you don't have the money, so I'm going to have to go and get a job so we can take care of you. Well, that's the fairy story.
That's the story.
Fairy story. But actually, my family did leave Birmingham because of the terror.
Mm-hmm.
We were not living poorly. My father worked in the steel mill, Bestman Steel.
Mm-hmm.
When I returned now, I never returned until the civil rights days with Dr. King. I can go and live in the same house where I was born.
It's still there.
It's still there and has been modernized by my. See, most of the relatives on my father's side, in his generation, they never left. They were willing to take that horror because they were living fairly well. On my mother's side, from Florence, Alabama, my mother and father met in Birmingham.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my mother's people left the South and came either Chicago, Detroit, or Cleveland. Few stopped in St. Louis. But almost none of her relatives continued to remain in the South. And
did you go to school at all in the South?
I was 8 months old.
Oh, well,
I was smart enough to go. I was smart enough to go. But
okay, all right.
But
all right.
I was 8 months old. My mother and father, to give us some idea how desperate my mother was to get my dad out of, because he was kind of not wild, but he was a race man.
Stand-up man.
He was a race man, and Mama was always afraid. If he had not been, in his own way, in some communication with Hugo Black, the man who later became Supreme Court Justice, and from which I get my slave name. My grandparents, all born in slavery. On my father's side, the Black family were the slave masters of my father's family.
All right.
And so even that, Mr. Hugo Black in the South, who was a Ku Klux Klansman, still had communication with my dad. So my dad got away with a lot of stuff because in the idiomatic phrase, he was Hugo Black's nigger. And so they'd leave my dad get away with a lot of stuff. For example, Mama said that Dad would put his pistol in his pocket and go vote. Now, that was insane in Birmingham.
Yeah, because nobody could vote.
They let him go because his vote didn't count for that much anyhow. But he was just that kind of person. I got a little bit of my dad in me in some ways. So my mother, one of my father's friends, was accused of insulting a white lady. And days of those times, they according to my mother and dad, they tortured him. Then they hung him, strung him up in front of a lot of white people that came out. And then they, after they had strung him up and hung him, they let him down, and they burned his body and sold his bones, the bones of the beast. And my mother knew that it was time for us to get out of that place, with my dad being the kind of person he was. He was kind of a nationalist. He was a Garveyite in very early times. So my mother's mother was here in Chicago, taking care of my aunt, her youngest sisters, helping to take care of their children. So Mama had an excuse. You have people there, and so we're going. But it gives some idea of how horrendous
the climate
was, even though the month before, in July 1919, there had been the big race riot in Chicago.
In Chicago.
July of 1919. My mother and father, in spite of that, in August,
came to
Chicago.
Well, that's something to consider, isn't it?
Yeah.
So you lived, when you came to Chicago, did you stop on the west side or the south side?
Well, my mother and father had, my mother at least, my dad had knew some people here, but my mother's relatives met us at the train station, the old IC station.
Right.
And friends and relatives, and they lived, generally, they had begun to move south of the old Black Belt. They began to move into what we now call the Grand Boulevard area. And they had space. So for temporarily, we moved with that family, and I forget the name of it, of them, at 48th and St. Lawrence.
Oh, you were really far out.
Yeah,
that was like the suburbs at that time.
Way out south,
yes,
they called it.
Way out south.
Way out south, they called it.
All right.
And so...
how long were you there?
Well, I can actually right now walk from where I live, 49th and Drexel, to every house, a vacant lot where I've ever lived.
Is that right? Then you went to Willard School?
Originally, I started at Fuller.
Okay.
At 42nd, I think it is, in Chamonix. That's where I started kindergarten.
Okay.
Fuller only went to 4th grade, but we were busy moving.
Okay.
Like many of the people of color in that period. At that time, we lived at 42nd in Champlain with one of my father's friends who owned the building there. We lived in that building. But we were constantly moving southward. And so we moved again, and I went to Forestville.
All right.
And by I get to Forestville, I'm in 1st grade
already,
because I've been in kindergarten at Fuller. And then another move came because the neighborhood was getting crowded. People began to move in as things open up. And I moved, and I went to Willard.
Okay.
And Willard was on triple shift.
All right.
And my aunt, who was a very aggressive, creative person, she found out that blacks, Negroes, had just had a chance to move across Grand Boulevard. The place that we now call...
Which was South Parkway.
South Parkway. And that was Grand Boulevard at that point. They changed the name later. And we moved to 5012 Calumet.
Okay.
There are 2 buildings left in the 5000 block on Calumet. One of them is a building where we used to live.
Okay.
And the reason I think for that is a black family bought that building early, and it's constantly just going through the family. Now it's being rehabbed.
All right.
The other was Buddy Smith, and that's another story in and of itself. Buddy Smith's father was from New Orleans, And he and Louis Armstrong were boyhood friends. They were close friends. So when Louis was in town, or before he went away to New York, Louis would come up to see Mr. Smith, who had a barbershop there. And then he would take all his kids and at least pay our way into the Willard Theater.
I remember
which
that.
was right around...
which was on 51st Street.
Yes.
Between what was called South Parkway or Grand Boulevard and Calumet.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure if you went to the Willard Theater, you also remember that on Saturdays you could get in for some small amount of money, and they would have these serials where you'd see the stagecoach going over the cliff, and you come back the next Saturday to see, and somehow the person managed to jump free just as the stagecoach went over the cliff.
Yeah.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was Tom. For my time, it was Tom Mix and Hoot Gibson and those kind of cowboy names and other thrillers. Zane Grey. There were no blacks, incidentally, until later.
We didn't expect to find them either.
Yeah.
We weren't surprised.
Yeah.
Did you go to high school at DuSable or Dunbar or Phillips, or who got you?
After we changed neighborhoods, 50-12. Now I'm now second grade.
Okay.
And I'm going to Burke School, Edmund Burke School, 54th and South Park.
All right.
And we had a mixed population at Burke at that time.
Okay.
Not a lot, but there were still some whites, and then there were blacks who lived going to Burke, who lived east of South Park or Grand Boulevard.
All right.
So when I graduated in 1932, there was an option. We could go to Inglewood, Phillips, or Hyde Park.
Okay.
Now some people chose to go to Hyde Park. The ones that live east of chose to go to Hyde Park, to their regret later. But anyway,
well, Conrad Worrell would take exception.
Well, they were even before Conrad Worrell, of course.
Okay.
There were just very, very few people of color at Hyde Park.
So where did you go?
I went to Inglewood.
You went to Inglewood. You know, my mother, there was a thing where if you had an address in the area of the school, you could go to the school, and we had relatives. So my mother so wanted to separate me from my those hoodlum friends of mine, as Stevie Wonder would say, that she decided that I should stay at this other address so I could go to Inglewood, and I didn't want to be separated. So the first time they called the roll and verified the addresses, they said, "What is your address?" And I gave them my address at 51st and Champlain, and they transferred me right out of there, right to DuSable, and it was like throwing a rabbit in a briar patch, because all my friends were at DuSable. I was in McLeod Division with Ramon Price. Captain Walter Diet was the band master, and it just had more flavor and more culture. I loved it.
Yeah. Well, Inglewood, by the way, at my graduation class was Charles White, the artist, from Burke School.
Okay.
We had a lot of people, a lot of talent. I'm trying to think of my friend who...
there were a lot of whites at Inglewood when you went there, because they were still there when I got there.
Oh, yeah, there were more whites, and that was one of the reasons. And it wasn't so much the reason why I left. I left primarily because the teachers showed their bigotry.
Oh, yes.
And at that time, you couldn't use a swimming pool, and they had separate proms, just as I see is happening now in this town in Mississippi. They had separate proms. And not that the blacks, because generally speaking, the blacks who went to Inglewood at that time, socioeconomically, were superior to the whites who were there. They had more education. Their parents had more education. They were just happened to be blacks. And the teachers, taking the culture and the tradition of the bigoted world that we live in, unless you came from a
noted family,
a middle-class type family. My daddy worked at Stockyards. Most of the guys that I went to Inglewood with, their fathers worked at the post office. There were like people like Julian Dawson, whose father was a doctor. His uncle was Bill Dawson, and so on and so forth. Unless Carl Cotton, well, Carl later went to Hyde Park, and he became the first taxidermist at a large museum in the country. He was taxidermist at the Field Museum for many, many years until he died. So we had a lot of notable people. Marie Bryant, who became the choreographer for Duke Ellington on a number of occasions. I'm the only one that was a failure.
Why do you call yourself a failure?
Compared to those people.
When I met you, you were really, well, let me tell you, I know the political side of you. You know, in fact, I know you as an educator and activist. I don't know what else you ever did, but what I saw you, Chicago League of Negro Voters, protest at the polls, you were hanging out with Gus Savage and Bennett Johnson, and let's see who else was in there. Frank London Brown, I think, was in the group. Dr. Margaret Burroughs, who was Goss then, I think.
She was Burroughs.
Was she Burroughs then? Okay. So you were hanging out with what were regarded by some as the radical element in the city.
Yeah, that was my learning experience on this. I was just learning.
Okay.
But when I went to Inglewood, just to quickly go through that story, because, and I was just looking at someone about 58th Street, there were a cluster of us who began to resent it and hang out and began to get in trouble. And then I was caught cutting class.
Okay.
And the principal, not the principal, assistant principal, had my father come to school, and I'm telling you, I gave you a description of what kind of man my dad was.
Yeah, no nonsense.
And then the man began to talk to my dad like he was a little boy. And though I was wrong, you know, my dad's going to take care of that all right, but he, you know, being courteous to this, and the principal told him how he should discipline me. And my dad said, look, little bitty guy, you don't pay my salary. I pay your salary. And I knew then it was time for me to leave Inglewood.
Right.
So I forged my mother's name.
Oh, my.
And went to Phillips. Didn't know, scared to death. Because in my little clique, my mother's clique and all those uppity Negroes, that Phillips was not the place to be for the children. Go to Tilden or go to Hyde Park or go to Inglewood or something like that. Was a class thing, you see.
I know.
Now, I didn't realize all the mix of class it was at. So I went to Phillips. I knew people at Phillips because we had people at Phillips, and Bill Green, who became the first, one of my classmates from Burke. Bill Green became the first IRS black agent in the country. So I'm telling you, they had just a lot of talent in that place. So Bill was going there because his grandmother had died and left a piece of property on Giles, and his father and mother's father worked in the post office. His father and mother decided to move there. Was, you know, something for nothing. They were moving from 51st in Indiana. So I knew Bill and I knew other people there. But I hadn't thought of it in that term. I was thinking in my mother's terms. And so when I did that, and I took it home and she, oh my Lord, I don't know what's going on, but you can't quit school. You can't quit school. Couldn't quit school. Go to work or quit school. For them, it was school. So while I was looking around for the office, one of my friends said, I'll show you where the office is. Went to the office. And then they assigned me to a homeroom. And I went to the homeroom. And at this point, the junior high schools that used to exist, of which Phillips had one in it, had now converted to just single 4-year high schools. And so they'd had a graduation that previous semester, or not previous semester, but at that time. And there was high school. And so I went and sat down, and because my name was B, I was sitting close to the front, and they were sitting alphabetically. And the guy who was sitting right in back of me became relatively well known. His name was Nat King Cole.
Really? Oh my goodness, you went to school with Nat. Was your picture up at Phillips High School?
Phillips and DuSable.
Is that, why at DuSable?
Because I went to DuSable.
You didn't tell me you went to DuSable. You said you were at Inglewood. Then you got yourself out of Inglewood and took yourself to Phillips. Now, where does DuSable come in? Well,
DuSable comes in 1935. I was on the basketball team at DuSable, by the way.
Okay.
And then we had a good team. But in 1935, they had a fire at Phillips.
Okay.
And it somewhat consumed the gym and the auditorium.
Okay.
They had began to build the frame of DuSable, of the new building.
Okay.
But the idea of building this new building was because the high school African-American population was growing so fast that Phillips had already grown much too small for that population. And it was to contain that population in the Black Belt. So they were busy building it. Now, when Phillips had the fire, they rushed, when we went and sent us to the new building, which was then called New Wendell Phillips High School.
Oh, right.
In its beginning. New Wendell Phillips High School in 1935. And so we went to the New Wendell Phillips High School. The old school, under the leadership of Mardell Bowsville, was to be an elementary school.
Okay.
And so, when we went up to the new school, somewhere in between 35 and June of 36, a group of African-American women meeting at the Hall Branch Library, which is right around the corner.
On 48th and Michigan.
48th and Michigan. Because they came from the leisure class, and we did have a black leisure class where those women whose husbands and other had money, or, you know, played like they had money, would play cards, give their time away or whatever. Some of them knew that the first settler in the city of Chicago was a man by the name of Jean-Baptiste Point de Sable. We later changed that to DuSable for obvious reason. And they demanded that that new building be named after this first settler.
And they were the ones.
And they had the political base that they could force that issue if necessary. The mayor of the city of Chicago at that time was a man by the name of Edward J. Kelly. But it was a black community that was supporting either party, because we switched around a little bit then. So they named the new building and then restored the name of the old Phillips to Phillips High School, and changed the boundaries. So if you lived north of 43rd Street, you went to the old building, the old Phillips. And if you lived south of 43rd, you went to the now DuSable High School.
You went to DuSable with Harold Washington, the late mayor?
I was before Harold.
You were before him?
He graduated in 39, I graduated in 37.
Okay.
See, at that time when I had that flirt at Inglewood, they flunked me in everything but gym.
Really?
Yeah, I made it up. I didn't take but one. My last semester, I wouldn't take but one class.
All right.
Yeah.
So you did actually graduate from DuSable?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And from there, did you go right into college, or did you go to the military?
No, I had, what happened to me is, I was with Gene Saffold and all that group, Blackburn and all, and we had scholarships to Xavier University.
That's because you were this basketball.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, the whole team. They took the whole team. They had been doing that for a few years, Xavier University. And so, but I got down there and I began to look at all those pretty girls.
Oh, my.
And I knew I was going to get in trouble with him. My brother was going to the University of Illinois at that time.
Okay.
And my folks were poor. They couldn't afford that. So I made the excuse that I, you know, was going to come back, go to work, and help my mother and dad pay for my brother's education.
Okay.
They didn't like it, my mother particularly, because, see, at that time, her friends were competing with her as that period of black history will indicate. The parents of that group were very aggressive about their children going to school, and then they got competitive. So they asking my mother, because their children are going on to college, they wouldn't talk about my sister and my brother. They would ask, what am I doing? So my mom was embarrassed by not being able to say I was doing them. But anyway, I came back and began to work in ma and pa grocery stores in the neighborhood. And that was okay because I was staying at home. But every night my mother would be saying, when you going back to school, when you going back to school?
When did you go back?
Well, time passed. And
How
one
much
day,
time?
Oh, quite a bit.
Quite a
One
bit.
day, yeah, quite a bit. One day, to make the story roll along fairly quickly, one day I came in from my, I was celebrating my birthday with George Oliver, who later became quite a famous playwright out. So he was living in Woodlawn. We had moved into Woodlawn by this time. Restrictive covenants had been challenged by Mr. Hansberry, Lorraine's father, and they'd broken down in one part. And by the way, the guy who read the majority opinion was Justice Hugo Black, the ex-slave master's family. So that's when Northwest Woodlawn opened up. Southwest Woodlawn had been dominantly black since time immemorial, since 1890s, 1880s. So I fiddled around like that, and then eventually I went into the insurance business with Chicago Metropolitan, was then the Metropolitan Funeral System. I was making more money than almost any college graduate I knew. I just see no reason. By this time, I began to find out there were differences between girls and boys, and that was fascinating.
Very interesting.
Fascinating. And so I began to just float around and have a good time. I hang out on the streets, go to all the fancy dances at the Parkway Ballroom, and meet all the, meeting Lester Young and Billie Holiday, and who wants to go to college? You go see these people, and Ethel Waters. And so I'm just having a good time. And so one evening, December the 7th, 1941, George and I in the bar, the 411 bar on 63rd Street, which was Riley Kelly's, not excuse, that was his front for what he really did, making money in the policy business and gambling. And someone said on the radio, we were busy having a little taste, someone said, Pearl Harbor has been bombed. Now I'm enjoying myself and on my birthday, and I quipped. I said, I didn't know anything about Pearl Harbor, though I had two cousins in Honolulu. She shouldn't have drank so much.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know it. I thought Pearl Harbor was a person name. Well, when I got home, my mother said, James and my other cousin, in Honolulu, they went over there to work. They were anticipating this. I'm convinced that the military and the President of the United States were anticipating a strike on Pearl Harbor and helping it to be, because we were isolationists, the United States at that point. And with Hitler having risen and Tito, or whatever his name, the emperor of Japan, saying Asia for the Asians, and much of our resources were coming from there. They had to somehow get some excuse to get into that war. And because my cousins had no reason to go to Honolulu except they needed a job. The Depression is still continuing. And so when I got home, my mother was worried, because that's the way she was. She was a worrier. I mean, she was big mama to everybody. And so she got on the Western Union right away to find out where her children were, what was happening to them. It turned from that point on, December the 7th, 1941. Now, I had already always, in order to keep up with my brother and friends, did reading. I'd go to the University of Chicago when people like E. Franklin Frazier, scholars, the man, the late president of Morehouse, all of these, they couldn't go to school after undergraduate school. They couldn't go to graduate school in the South at that time. So they would pay, the state would pay their way to any school they wanted to go to in the North. And so you had people like Julian Bond's father, Horace Mann Bond, and those scholars going to the university, and then the university would let them speak on occasion at Rockefeller Chapel. Well, I'd leave my pool room and go to hear these guys, so since I couldn't shoot pool so good, I could always brag about who I had seen and heard.
Did you ever go to those meetings in Washington Park?
Oh, yeah.
There was always some speaker in those meetings, but it was mostly men there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the people I have in this book, what's his name? He's 103, was one of the speakers. But there would be people like Earl B. Dickerson, Oscar Brown Sr., Goatee Brown, Edgar G. Brown, who was an agitator first rate. Well, that was right across the street from our school.
Okay.
And so we would listen to him, and then during the Depression, with people like, what's his name, still living, he's 93, 94, lived down the street from me. But anyway, they would be agitating, and sometimes, because the person hadn't paid their rent,
they'd set them out on the street.
And these guys would say, "Come on, Miss Jones is out on the street. Let's go put her back in." And we kids thought that was fun. So we would go help put her back in. They were certainly, when they became members of some of them became members of the Communist Party, busy trying to recruit us youngsters. But somehow I would never join her in any real sense. But I got labeled, and that paid it, so I had to pay. That cost me something, both in the Army as well as in civilian life. But I don't regret it. I had a good time. When I went to the Army, I was, first time that I had been south in an unguarded way. Our team used to go south. But the people would cluster around us where we were going, like we were going to Memphis or Washington. The people knew we were crazy, so they would not let us get out on our own, so we never had any problems like that. But when I left Camp Custer to go to training camp in Fort Lee, Virginia, Camp Lee it was called then, and I had on my uniform, and people could go in the store. I had my uniform on. They didn't have a uniform on. I'm talking about men now. And they would get waited on before me.
Really?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
They were white?
They were white.
Okay.
So they had the privilege of getting in front. And even though I might be racing to try and get back to camp on time, they still had the right to do that. There's so many stories. Then I saw another thing. I saw another black culture. I hadn't thought of it. But when I finally began to get into a unit that was getting ready to leave and get out and go overseas, my unit, 308th Railhead unit company, most of the guys in there were young men from the rural agricultural South. And they were very different.
From this urban
South. South or North. Now the guys from places like Atlanta, Birmingham.
A little more cosmopolitan.
And they resented us Northerners. Because we thought, and maybe they were right, we thought we were better than them. It's like East Side, West Side, Chicago in some ways. And so I had to make an adjustment because they were not bad guys. I had to let them know that I was
that you were a good guy too.
Good guy and was just as rough as they was. If they messed with me, I was going to kick their butt. And I had to do that on occasion.
Oh my goodness. Well,
so they were respected.
Okay, well let's get you out of the war because I don't want this television.
Yeah. So anyway, we went into Normandy very early. If you don't see any blacks in Saving Private Ryan, that shows it was a fair story because we were there.
All right.
And I went through up through Normandy into Belgium, up through northern France, into Germany, and I saw Buchenwald, which was a tearful experience. And I was discharged. Well, I wasn't discharged first. We were supposed to go to Japan after and I had 4 battle stars, and my whole unit was given the Croix de Guerre with Palm, which is the highest French decoration. And we were slated to go to Japan to try to end that thing, and I was in Marseille when we got the word that Hiroshima had been bombed with another kind of weapon that I could not even imagine, because I'd been through a lot of bombings and stuff. And I had made a decision that when I came back home, 'cause I was with guys who were smarter than me, that was another thing. But they treated me like their little brother. And so I wanted, and they had all gone to school, because we were all supposed to go to OCS. But we were restricted partly because we were black, but they looked at my record with these people I'm talking about that used to go put people back in the house and considered me a troublemaker. And every unit I'd go to, they'd call me in and say, the commanding officer would say, it says here you're a troublemaker. I said, oh, what could they be saying that about? I had made a decision along with a lot of other contemporaries in the Army. We had been away, wherever, that this world had to change, had to get serious. And I made a decision I was coming back home as soon as possible. I was going to go to school. I had now no more excuses.
Okay, so now we get you in school.
Yeah, after I'd married and started a family, but
okay.
I went to Roosevelt.
You went to Roosevelt. Is that where you met Gus Savage?
Yeah, that's where I met Gus. That's where I met
Harold. Was Harold down there too? Harold Washington?
Yeah, Harold was there. Harold was
Okay.
there. He was a studious, quiet guy.
Okay.
And Bennett.
Bennett Johnson was at Roosevelt?
Yeah, Bennett.
Okay.
I think.
What about Herman Gilbert? Was he down there?
I'm not sure, but I met Herman in another context. He may have been there though.
Okay.
And you know, it was a place where we rushed to get into because now Roosevelt is offering an open enrollment to everyone if they could make the grade. And all of us, Chicagoans particularly, could pass those tests. We didn't have any problems with that. There were a few, again, rural Southern, aggressive youngsters who had little problems doing the work, but they were aggressive.
What was the attraction of politics for you? You know, why did you decide to get involved in, say, electoral politics, the right of black people to vote, the right of black people to elect their own representatives, as in the Chicago League of Negro Voters that ran the first candidate for citywide office, the first black candidate for citywide office, Lemuel Bentley for city clerk. By the way, how is Lemuel Bentley? I haven't heard
No,
of
he passed.
When? How long ago
Oh,
was
he's
that?
been gone for a little while. He paid a price for that.
Did
he? When he would go into the courtroom, the judges, he would be singled out because he had the audacity to run against the establishment.
Okay.
And he had the audacity to do that as an independent. He didn't go through. So he paid pretty dearly for that. And he married someone that I remember. I can't remember who that was, but he passed. Now, I always, in my house, in our place, my mother and father talked politics all the time.
Okay.
And when at that time you had to be 21 before you could register to vote. When I was 21, they asked me after, have you registered? Then after that, they said, did you vote? And during Roosevelt's campaign, earlier campaigns, we began to activate little youth groups to support Roosevelt and try to convince our mamas and daddies to change from the Republican Party to vote for, because they were Republicans for the most part at that time. So I had a feeling. Then when I got to Germany, particularly when I was in Germany, the fact that people were restricted in their ability to vote gave me another feeling about the natural power which numbers have. When I came back, having this feeling about changing things, immediately I began to get active in politics. But the most crowning moment was becoming active with the Progressive Party in 1948, where we were demanding that the Army, that armed forces never again be segregated. In fact, because of that pressure, with A. Philip Randolph, with Paul Robeson and all the other liberal whites, the president at almost the last minute signed a bill, signed an order outlawing segregation in the armed forces from that point forward. Didn't take place right away, but now, as we know it, unfortunately, it's taking place. Now, on the labor end, we began to understand that politics. I had helped to organize retail clerks when I was working in mom and pop grocery stores in my teenage years. Now we began to agitate with people like Oscar Brown Jr., get more active. And
Oscar Brown Sr.
Oscar Brown Sr. No, Jr.'s getting old. Yeah.
Oh, Jr.
He was put on the slate of Progressive Party. I think he was 18 or 19 to run for state representative. Oh, yeah. He was right with his dad. He was right with his dad, yeah. And Oscar was a rebel, too.
I know Oscar was a rebel, but
he was at Inglewood. He was that way. And so the political base began to be laid by some of us younger people at that time, because we began to believe and know that things could change if people had common grievances and would work together to make the change. And so when I began to go to Roosevelt, Bennett and Gus and all those guys were already active in political things, whether it was in school or not. Harold was come out of a political family. So because of his personality and because he wasn't over there with Gus and them completely, he was chosen to be the president of the student council, or whatever they called it at that time. That was almost unheard of. But Roosevelt was trying to show a liberal side, in addition to his own competence. He was elected. So in that little circle, though I was a little older than those fellows, as we were graduating, the decision was Harold would stay inside the organization, but be a thorn in the side of the organization. Gus would be outside agitating, along with the rest of the guys that that you've named, be outside agitating, and I would be around helping them to do it in whichever way I do it. Now we began to get very active, and particularly in the 50s, as more and more the NAACP, under the leadership of Thurgood Marshall, was beginning to go into court. We began to see that one of the restrictions of the people in the South was they couldn't vote. And so it was our duty to vote for them, since they couldn't vote. And very early on, as I was saying, though I was raising a family, in addition to going to school and working, as often as I could, I was with the movement. Now, another part of that was NAACP in Chicago was encouraging people to register. And then when Willoughby Abner became the president of the local NAACP and had the audacity to put a picket line around the mayor's office on education after the 1954 decision, we saw the political machine take over the NAACP, and it's never relinquished the Chicago NAA, which at that time was one of the strongest NAAs in the country. We had a West Side affiliation, South Side affiliation, and a North Side affiliation, and we worked together. And I'm trying to remember some of the names of all those activists in there.
I want to remember some of the names. I want you to mention some of the names of the people that you have interviewed for your first volume. I know there are a lot of them, but just so that people will have an idea of what they can expect to encounter in this first volume. Who?
Well, George Johnson, the
cosmetics person.
Yeah,
Okay.
George Johnson products.
Okay.
And the first volume was not Ed Gardner's not in that first volume. He'll be in the next one, but.
Well, don't limit it to the first volume. Then, who are some of the?
Oh well, you've had people like Jewel, Stratford, Rogers, LaFontaine, Carey-Hose.
Okay,
who was, a prominent Republican.
Right.
And that was used quite a bit by boards to offset the race accusations.
Okay.
I have my good friend who passed about a month ago, Buddy Boy, the hustler. Walter Brown, who made his life went all over the world, but never really took a job that he couldn't do some hustling. And he was an expert.
Okay.
So much so that people loved him. He didn't mind being hustled. I have John Levy, who was born in New Orleans, but grew up in Chicago, and was a prime musician. But he saw the business end of the entertainment business while he was still learning how to play his instruments. So he wound up more in the business end than the playing end, but he did play with George Shearing, played behind Billie Holiday and people like that, but managed those people. And finally now, of course, the only person he has left is Nancy Wilson, and Joe Williams was his one. But he is a part of that. He grew up around Willard School, and then, what you going to ask me that question? That would have been.
I want to think of some women. You mentioned
Jewel.
Jewel LaFontaine. You got Dr. Margaret Burroughs in there?
Yeah. No, not Dr. Margaret Burroughs. Couldn't get it to everybody. But Etta Moulton Barnett,
Okay.
and that's a great one.
You got Lou Palmer.
I didn't get to Lou in it. There's just so many people I missed. Like so many people I missed. I kind of haphazardly run across these people. But the
any of your old school teachers, were there any of them around? Because I still know that one of my professors from Northwestern University 28 years ago came to the ceremony on May 18th when I was getting the Professor Emeritus Award, and I was just flabbergasted.
Who was that, Sterling?
No, his name is Dr. Charles William Nelson Thompson.
The name's me. I don't know whether I ever met him or not.
Yeah.
But primarily, they were just ordinary folk that I knew and grew up with. And,
who could help shed some light on growing up in Chicago.
And it's a fascinating story.
But to think that you went to all our schools, I mean, just about the ones that I'm
where the colored
familiar
people
to
were.
be. Yeah, to DuSable, Phillips, and Inglewood. You know.
Yeah. So it made the advantages that I have. I would
walk
claim
everywhere you ever lived in Chicago.
Yeah, I would claim that my haphazard and highly diverse experiences, in a peculiar way, give me the advantage in writing an oral history of the kind that I have written. Because
was Dempsey around with you during those years?
Dempsey and my brother were good friends. Dempsey was with Harold.
All right.
You see, underestimate my age. I'm an old man.
Well,
but Dempsey, they were 2 years behind me.
Okay.
But Dempsey and Harold and that group of Charles Davis and all of those guys. I was with Clarice. I got Clarice Davis Durham, Earl Durham's
widow.
Yeah. I mean, Charles, wasn't Earl's sister-in-law, but what was Durham's first name?
Earl B. No, that's Earl B. Dickerson.
But I have those kind of interesting people who lived interesting lives. Now, despite the success or the lack of success, the major theme, which I never ask about, that runs through this is race.
Okay.
They have traveled the hard road like a jewel whose grandfather and father were lawyers in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and suffered the race riot of 1921. Come to Chicago. They're conservative. They try to do it the American way. Jewel takes up, she becomes the first black woman to graduate from law school at the University of Chicago Law School. And fitting into the mold. She marries, her first husband is Jack Rogers, who's the father. The father of young John Rogers, who has Ariel Products. I got him, by the way, in the second generation.
Okay.
They do everything the American way, but they're still faced with the confrontation of race. Confrontation. They're reminded, even unconsciously, that they're still Negroes.
Right.
That therefore they could not possibly be equal to the white folks. And I never asked the question. They just, it comes in. And since they weren't in the same room at the same time, they are saying these things independently.
Of each other.
Of each other. It's just fascinating to hear the struggles of people wanting to get into the system and not being able to make it, at least in my generation. And it seeps down to the second and third generation.
Well, I know it had to be true for you because it certainly was true for me, that all of the principals of the schools that I attended were white.
Yes.
And all of the assistant principals were black.
Yes.
And the assistant principals actually managed the schools.
Oh, yes, Mr. Woodley. Not Woodley, but French.
Mr. French, James A. French, who was the assistant principal at DuSable High School.
He's still living, by the way.
Is he? Well, I'm going to ask you afterwards if he still lives where I think he lives, because I want to be in touch with him.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know he belonged to the Church of the Good Shepherd out south, and he may still be there. But when you think about it, these black administrators did all the work. They managed the school, they managed the teachers, they managed the children, whether they were discipline problems or not. And the principals, the white principals, were primarily overseers. They just made certain that colonial education went according to plan. But very little contact did we have with them. They came to the assembly and made announcements and so forth and so on. We were educated by black people in the main.
But most of mine, I didn't have a black teacher until I went to Phillips.
Is that right?
And I was glad when Mr. Dorsey introduced me and others to the concept of there is a black history. And he inserted that into American history. And he did it in such a way that we could see the relationship. So,
who were your teachers at Willard? You didn't have any teachers that taught you black history, because that's where I started mine.
No.
Nobody sent you to the Hall Branch Library?
I tell you, the Hall Branch wasn't built then.
Oh, okay. Well, you're a minute ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and when I went to Willard, I didn't stay that long. I told you, by the time I got to second grade, I was at Burke.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So you wouldn't remember anything there.
Yeah, and I know that I didn't see any. And as far as I knew, I couldn't see any. I guess there were some, but I didn't see any.
But I know that you have spent a lot of years in education. So what were some of the schools where you taught, where you were administrator or an educator?
Oh, when I first started teaching, I went out to New York. They wanted a Negro teacher out there. That was good for me, good for the kids. But the administration didn't like the way I handled the subject of American history.
Okay.
I corrected the American history.
Okay, you revised it.
Yeah, okay, so I left. But I was not in the city of New York. I was outside. So I'm a big city guy, and so I'd have to catch the train every weekend into Harlem or someplace. Then I went to Gary, again a suburb.
Okay.
And I was there. I was in a doctoral program at USC, and they said I had to, I would have some teaching experience. So I went out to Gary. That was an interesting experience because that was an all-black school.
Okay.
And almost every faculty person there, had to have at least a master's degree. And 2 or 3 of them went on to be presidents of historical black colleges.
Okay.
The principal and I didn't get along so well because I didn't fit in with his idea about the political life of Gary. And I had so many, by this time I had so many offices all over the city, all over the country really, but my family is shaky. So,
well, if we're going to get up to the point at which you are acting president of a city college, we have 5 minutes to do it.
All right, well, why don't you carry us on up there?
Well,
when I left, very quickly then, I left the public school system, left the city, and I was so frustrated, and I went into the teacher corps.
Okay.
And then someone said, Fred Ramey and some of those guys were demanding black administrators. I went over to Wilson as the dean of transfer programs, and then I was the presidency of the Olive Harvey was shaky, and the chancellor suggested that I go over to Olive Harvey and take over.
Is that where you retired from? Were you still, no, you left Olive Harvey, you went somewhere else.
I was fired at Olive Harvey. As you remember, you were one of my defendants.
Well, you know, you were railroaded. Fired is not a correct term, because they wanted to put somebody else in place, in your place.
Yeah.
You know?
So you and Jim, who was it, Jim? He was a student there then. But anyway, I left there because they couldn't put me out of the system when they found out the kind of support base I had.
Right.
They took me downtown in administration.
And they put you in an office so you could stay out of trouble.
And that didn't help. So finally, Shabbat and I had to agree that I went on back in the classroom.
Okay.
So I was at what was then at beginning Luke College.
Okay, now it's the Harold Washington.
Now it's the Harold Washington. That's where I retired.
How long have you been retired?
14 years.
14 years?
Yeah.
You having a good time, aren't you?
Trying to finish this book.
Okay.
Trying to get on to some other thing.
Okay.
What I would like to do, and I say this, is eventually Sinclair Drake suggested that I ought to bring Black Metropolis up to drum. I'd like to get some young black scholars and begin to work on that. Okay, well, put out a call to young black scholars to contact Timuel Black. No. I would need some advice in selecting, but I want to finish this other stuff first.
Okay, all right.
But that was what Drake, who
gave you that charge.
And he was on his way out at the time. In fact, he and you know,
well, you know,
came.
W.B. Du Bois was working on Encyclopedia Africana when he left this plane.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's always good to undertake a major work. And someone else, if we don't finish it, someone else will.
Well, we have the quality of scholars now that could take hold of something like this and do a good job. I just like to be looking at them while they're doing it.
Oh, you don't want to work? Yeah. Well, I just know.
But it needs to be. See, Black Metropolis stops at 1945.
Okay, so
Since
that's
that
a
time.
lot of years.
Since that time, the black community has changed.
Oh, time and time again.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you up to the task.
Well,
I'm sure you can do it. I've seen you do a lot of other things. Have you run for political office?
I ran for political office 3 times, I think.
Okay.
I was cheated out of political office 1 time.
Okay.
I ran for political office in 1963. I ran for the alderman of the 4th Ward, and that was a period in which I coined the phrase which is used and not getting credit, and that is plantation politics.
Okay.
Talking about the Silent Six.
Okay.
Which we kind of referred to. Then I ran for state senate.
Okay.
And I thought many people thought I'd won, but the 2nd Ward vote wasn't in yet.
Okay.
So that did out. And then during the Civil Rights Days, not the Civil Rights Days, during the days of the H3O, I was so sure that I was going to be the state senator from that district. I was so sure. I had the money, I had the troops, I had support. And inside the H3O, that's a story in and of itself, 2 people that we considered high-level leaders convinced me to sign an agreement along with Richard Newhouse. He had nothing at that time. That we would let Negroes pick the one. The idea was not have 2 Negroes running, 2 blacks running at the same time.
Right. So they convinced you that you should be the one to drop out.
They had to. I signed an agreement.
Oh, Tim.
And then Newhouse at that time didn't even have enough signatures. I was so confident that, and he to the point where when we came to that last meeting, he said I would leave if somebody would pay for the money. I said, okay, we'll get that money now. The white lady, what was her name, who raised money for black causes, she's dead now.
Okay.
I think you were at her funeral.
I don't remember her name.
But anyway, she gave her a lot of money. But anyhow, I was betrayed.
I probably am going to have to say, I
All
hear
right.
music creeping up. We have been with Tim Black. This is History According to Black. His new book is coming out in the fall of 2003, Bridges of Memory, an oral history of 3 generations of African Americans in Chicago, starting with Timuel D. Black Jr. and coming forward. It's been good to have you, too.
Yeah, I hope it's worthwhile.
Well, of course it's worthwhile, and this will help you because you can have this transcribed, see, and see
Okay.
what you're saying.